Hi, just confirming, am I audible and visible?
Yep, good to
Okay, cool. So I'm Carlos, PI's true voice. I'll try to ask for it in my speech, but yeah. I'll be starting my speech in three, two, and one. If you're going to compare the market revenue of Turning Red with the market revenue of Frozen 2 or Inside Out 2, I think it's very clear who wins this debate, and that's side government. The burden of themes here are very simple. Firstly, it's to prove what the immediate interest of the main actor or the company is. And secondly, the proximate interest of the consumers and the media industry as a whole. So a few pieces of framing before I get into my substantives, right? Firstly, what is a well-established popular company, right? I think a company that has a significant market presence, a well-recognized brand, and an existing catalog of successful franchises. These companies are often financially secure, have a loyal customer base, and possess the resources to leverage their past success. Why does this matter? I think this matters because it is key to understanding that the company has established infrastructure, fan loyalty, and financial backing will explain why such companies lean towards making sequels and remakes at the end of the day because they can afford to take fewer risks. So, what are sequels and remakes, right? I think it's very self-explanatory that these are going to be the continuation of stories or reboots, right? So why is this important? I think this is important because sequels and remakes allow for brand recognition and they tap into the existing fan bases rather than having to develop a new one from scratch. Thirdly, what does it mean to prioritize sequels and remakes, right? I think it means then that the production company will probably allocate resources, time, and budget towards creating sequels rather than new things. And this is important because the industry is driven by return of investment, and sequels and remakes offer a guaranteed audience compared to the risk of new original content, which can fail to meet expectation. But fourthly, why is it in the best interest of a popular production company to prioritize sequels and remakes, right? I think this lies in three things. Firstly, in terms of like economic benefits, wherein sequels and remakes come with built-in audiences, lower marketing costs, and often higher box office returns due to brand recognition. But secondly, in terms of like risk minimization, insofar as Hollywood operates in a high-risk industry where original content can be a financial gamble. And lastly, right, in terms of just like, appealing to nostalgia, insofar as modern cinema, nostalgia plays a huge role in audience engagement. But what is the impact of like prioritizing this, which will be expanded on later? So why is it so urgent to prioritize sequels and remakes, right? So I think this comes in three folds. Firstly, your claims to the copyrights are ticking, right? Insofar as there are legal deadlines wherein intellectual properties, including copyrights, are time bound. But secondly, there is a loss to the public domain wherein once intellectual property enters the public domain, they can freely be adapted and used by anyone, diluting the company's ability to monetize these franchises. But thirdly, in terms of like the urgency of it all, I think sequels or remakes must be prioritized now to capitalize on these properties before they lose exclusivity. But secondly, right, I think it's urgent because there is more the market interest is dwindling. Insofar as there are franchise fatigue risk, insofar as delaying sequels or remakes leads to audience engagement. Or secondly, like competing franchises, wherein other studios are constantly releasing content to dominate the market. So if one company fails to prioritize sequels, competitors will probably fill that gap. So examples of this are probably Incredibles 2 and Finding Dory cause a loss of because a tank because of a loss of interest, right? But thirdly, I think sequels are the prerequisite to new movies, insofar as of the sustained audience base, wherein prioritizing sequels keep the brand alive, retaining fan loyalty, and secondly, it's a financial cushion, insofar as profitable franchises provide the revenue and funding to take risk at the end of the day, which is a prerequisite for any of the benefits coming from side opposition. So why is making resources like less resource intensive than making new movies, right? I think three things. Firstly, there's already an established IP. Secondly, there's a pre-built audience and marketing advantage. Thirdly, right, existing production pipelines and assets wherein you can reuse assets, sequels can repurpose sets, costumes, CGI models, and animations created from earlier movies at the end of the day, right? So, a few points of argumentation. Firstly, I tell you from side proposition that it's better because of like the economic considerations, i.e. risk management and profitability. What is the premise of this argument? I think prioritizing sequels and remakes is economically safer and more profitable for well-established production companies compared to like producing new untested films. Why is this true? Three simple reasons. Firstly, they have a predictable audience demand wherein sequels have an established fan base, ensuring consistent box office return like Harry Potter or Marvel. But secondly, they have a proven track record insofar as the performance of the original movie provides data on what works and what doesn't. And thirdly, right, like merchandising and licensing opportunities wherein sequels build on the established branding, which increases the sale of merchandise. But what does this look like? I think this looks like Frozen capitalize on the existing love for the characters and story. Well, on their side of the house, right, creating a new movie like Strange World involves unpredictable costs, uncertain marketing outcomes, and risk of box office failure. So, what might Op say, right? I think Op will probably say that the industry will be less creative or they will be more reliant on nostalgia. This is me preempting. For two responses, right? Firstly, this is untrue because of two simple reasons. Firstly, studios fund originals too, insofar as profits from sequels enable studios to invest in original projects. For example, Disney used Frozen to success to fund a riskier movie like Soul. And secondly, right, sequels can innovate. Insofar as modern sequels like Top Gun Maverick show that sequels can push storyline boundaries because they want to appeal to the audience still and not lose the market share. But even if it's true,
Point.
right, I think the economic risk of prioritizing originals over sequels outweighs the creative stagnation argument. Insofar as without sequels generating profit, studios may lack resources to fund originals at all. Now, on my second point, right, I think on the risk of financial loss and market uncertainty is greater. What is the premise of this argument? I think opposition's preference for prioritizing new movie will probably expose production companies to greater financial losses and market unpredictability due to the untested nature of new intellectual property. Why is this true? Three simple reasons. Firstly, they have high production costs with no guarantees insofar as new movies require substantial investment in script writing, casting, marketing, and production without any assurance of market success. Secondly, right, it has unpredictable audience reception. Unlike sequels on comparative, right, new movies lack an existing fan base or brand equity, making their performance volatile. Thirdly, I think there is increased competition insofar as in a saturated entertainment market, new movies struggle to stand out against established franchises and competing media performances like streaming services. So why is this necessarily likelier to happen on side opposition? Two reasons. Firstly,
Point.
is 6 minutes. In media consumption and audiences increasingly prefer familiar and nostalgia-driven content, as shown by the consistent success of Marvel, Star Wars, and Harry Potter. But secondly, every failed original movie diverts resources from potential blockbuster sequels or remakes that could have generated significant media revenue. But I think at the end of the day, right, even if you don't buy all of that, cultural continuity and long-term engagement is better on side government because of the reasons I've already outlined since earlier. So I think on comparative, side opposition has to prove a lot of things. And not only that, they also have to outweigh the immediate economic benefits that you're going to get and secured from side proposition. And for all those reasons and more, I think this is a prop win as early as my speech.
I thank the speaker for that speech. For that, I would like to call upon the leader of opposition to have the floor. Here.
Great, just checking that everyone can see and hear me.
Yep.
Excuse
Good to
me. Excuse me.
Great.
Excuse me. Can someone just type the motion in the chat before the LO speech? I want to do it again.
We're doing the top motion, if that helps. POIs in the chat, please. Great. If that's all sorted, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. A couple of things I'm going to do in this speech. Firstly, a little bit of setup building on what PM has already said. Secondly, explaining why new movies are good for profit immediately. And thirdly, then, explaining why new movies are good for profits in the long term. Okay. Firstly, briefly on setup. We agree with some of what PM has said in terms of what are these production companies. They have lots of money behind them. They've been profitable for years. They have resources that they can spend on things, but they have a loyal audience to their brand name. See Pixar or Disney, where people will go and see the newest Pixar film or the newest Disney film, oftentimes irrespective of what that film actually is. Secondly, then, what does prioritization look like? This is if someone makes 5 movies a year, maybe 3 to 4 would have to be, in their world, sequels, or in our world, new films. Okay, what are the interests of the actor? We agree that the broad interest is profit, but we'd like to suggest that this itself splits into 2 other interests, which firstly is making good movies, which allows you to maintain your good brand name, allows you to maintain the market share you have, and secondly, being competitive in this field, making sure you get awards, making sure you get good press so you are able to continue on. Okay, first point of substantive then, why are good new movies good for you in the immediate short term? So, this is basically going to explain to you why you're better able to cater to an audience if you make a new film. There are a couple reasons why this is true. Firstly, movies are made with a specific demographic group in mind. If a movie is made for teenagers in the 90s, it is made for teenagers in the 90s. If then you make a sequel 30 years later, those teenagers are no longer teenagers. Their interests change. They are likely to have grown up. So the original audience who liked the first film are unlikely to be in the same place to like the sequel or the remake when it comes out. But secondly, it's hard for these films to amass a new audience because kids today don't know a lot about the film that came out long before they were born. It seems unfamiliar to them, but it also seems very opaque and hard to get into because this is something with established lore. This is something with established fan communities that you might not have been privy to before. See the Star Wars movies. If you don't know what's happened in the prequels and the original trilogy, it's very unlikely that you go and see the sequels because you kind of just don't know what's going on. And notably, the sequels lost profit every movie. Their profits declined. The third thing to say is just that there are changing media preferences. So people today care about issues that people 30 years ago wouldn't care about, which is to say, if kids today were able to get into sequels perfectly, there was no opacity, nothing I said was true, even if that, it's still hard for the sequel to work because people just care about different issues. See the Barbie movie, see the new Lorax movie. These are examples of issues that have only become popular recently, but are things that people care deeply about. Today's teenagers simply have different concerns to teenagers 30 years ago, and this means that it's unlikely that you're able to attract a similar demographic crowd that you even got for the original movie. The fourth thing to say here is that people are honestly quite fatigued with sequels. Look at the film market currently. Marvel dominated for years, but has started getting diminishing returns on their films. In fact, there's a term called Marvel fatigue that is used to describe this, which is just where people don't feel like coming back to see the next film because they're so oversaturated with sequels in the market. So, all of this should make you believe that it's very hard to actually find a niche crowd to cater to when you make a sequel. This means that in the immediate profit, you are able to directly target a specific group, find a specific issue they care about, and make a film about this. We point to recent examples like the Barbie movie, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, even like Oppenheimer. These are films that were absolute blockbusters. These are films that people loved. These are films that were new. These were not sequels, but this is what's making money, which means under our side, you are far more likely to draw a crowd that cares more about what's happening. I'll take that point.
Are you suggesting that we're not going to have any kind of progressiveness in terms of like political or social issues in government?
No, this isn't based on whether or not you have progressive ideas or not. It's simply to say that people care about different issues. So, for example, if just look at Barbie movies in general, the Barbie movies that were made 20 years ago are about, wow, I'm a woman, I should have rights too. But the Barbie movie made recently, which notably is not a sequel or a remake, it's a new exploration of a character. This is about entirely different issues. This is about something. This is about modern feminism. This is about the world as it is now, and this is impactful in what drew crowds. Okay, why are new movies then good in the long term? This is about maintaining an audience and your brand loyalty. This is about making sure that your studio doesn't collapse in 10 years. Which a couple things to say here. The first thing to say is that sequels, there's limited scope of story you can do with sequels. Films aren't made with sequels in mind. You can't necessarily predict the future. So, creators often tie up loose ends. They make their movies have compelling conclusions so that people actually enjoy watching them, actually come to the cinema. What this means is that it's often hard to get a sequel out of that. There are only so many things you can do with this existing intellectual property. Oh, and briefly a note, intellectual property lasts 70 years after the death of the creator. There is no urgency on this. Notably, also, it was previously shorter, but Disney lobbied the American government to change this. This is currently not a pressing concern. Back to the point. Films are because films are not made with sequels in mind, it's unclear that they're made in a way that allows sequels because, as I mentioned before, a compelling conclusion is something audiences want, so films are likely to include that. But then, if you have to make a sequel, you have to go back on that conclusion, which makes it quite hard to do. The next thing to say is that there's this concept called Flanderization, which is where characters are taken to their most extremes and they lose nuance and are flattened over the course of sequels. This is likely to be done by studios because they need to draw people to a familiar property. So they capitalize maximally on the couple things they notice that audiences like the most. This leads to a lack of nuance because they focus only on that as opposed to surrounding issues. See also the sequel to The Emperor's New Groove, if ever anyone has actually seen that, which included making Krunk the primary character, which completely destroyed the film and led to a poor amount of just poor profits. The next thing to say is that you're likely to retcon the original work, as in Jurassic Park, and change things to make a sequel possible, which leads to incredible amounts of online backlash. You risk losing loads of money, but you also lose face, which means people trust your brand less. Under our side, you have the money to experiment. You should always take that, take the chance, continue making money. Thank you.